Oh, yeah.
And welcome back to another episode of F.O.R.D.E. You'll have to forgive me if I sound a little bit under the weather, due to the fact that I'm recording these in the cold frosts of December and my body is made of cottage cheese. I'm feeling a little bit under the weather, so again, you'll have to forgive my weirdly ASMR-y voice today. But now back to the topic at hand. I do always wonder just how many of you guys have even played Thracia to begin with, so to make sure that you're always as confused as humanly possible, we'll be returning right back to FE5's table, since the first meal was so delightful that I couldn't help but ask for seconds. And while your knowledge of Thracia might be potentially thin, who knows, I certainly don't, your ability to solve my anagrams is always remarkably strong, as this week's was Sun Got Help, which quite simply transforms into the Onslaught. A raw as fuck chapter name now that I'm properly looking at it, correlating to chapter 14 of Thracia. Again, if you're unfamiliar with this, I'd highly recommend playing it, as it's both the first defense chapter in Fire Emblem, making it a pretty important cog in its history, and it's also just a pretty interesting map in general. So let's get to those categories, shall we? Starting off with flavor. Flavor this time around needs to be 3 different things if it wants to succeed in this category. Those being, it needs to be simple, it needs to be blunt, and it needs to be effective. Now, that might sound kind of weird from the outset, but trust me on this one, just gotta bear with me. The story of the chapter is remarkably simple. You're just defending a city from invaders. I say just, like, that's the foundation of the story. It is defend A from B. But more importantly, the invaders have a staggering numbers advantage, as is very important to have in a defense chapter. This means that your gameplay story integration should be incredibly straightforward. Have the player outnumbered and make them feel as though they're playing at a disadvantage, which thankfully the map does pretty effectively. Even by just looking at the number of units that the enemy starts with before any reinforcements should tell you that the Frege army has definitely done their homework and has brought every single troop necessary for this engagement. You've got Ballistae to snipe from afar, you've got mages to deal with your bulkier units, and most importantly of all, you've got legions and legions of armor knights, ready to charge into battle and die like they're fucking battle droids. You know, I can respect that. They're cannon fodder and they absolutely know it. They love dying for their country. You know, at the end of the day, patriotism exceeds health, so I can't really argue with that. And the fact that they're also receiving reinforcements on 5 of the 10 turns, I believe, really sells the idea that the enemy will absolutely not relent. But if you can hold out just a little while longer, perhaps you'll be able to survive the onslaught of their assault. I haven't even been meaning to work the titles into this, like legitimately. They've just kind of been naturally worming their way into this, and I really appreciate it. I'm all for it. I almost wish there was a little bit more to talk about when it comes to the chapter's flavor, but as I said, it's super straightforward, so it's not like I can talk about like a trillion different things that the chapter does really well. It's mostly just evoking this feeling of impending doom and trying to hold out in this Helm's Deep-esque scenario. You know, it's that type of situation where you feel like all hope is lost right now, but if you hold out, you're able to just see the sunrise, hope could just arrive on the horizon. It's that type of situation. Other than this, there's a few little details that stand out to me, like the Armor Knights literally breaking down the walls of the city to march in, or the small quips of dialogue from the civilians in the various houses scattered around the map, like really emphasizing the heavy atmosphere of the chapter, how they have stuff to say like, oh god, really? The war's come to our own doorstep? Or I should really move out, dude. I was planning to do it anyway. Like just many things like that that just really enhance, like a nice little spice in the flavor. It's good. It's not necessary, but it just helps. It would be insanely easy to fail when it comes to flavor for a defend map where you are just using your motley band of rebels to withstand an overwhelming presence, by just making it so the enemy isn't a threat gameplay-wise. So I'd say this category is a definite success, purely because it's a defend map where I at least feel stressed out. It might not be the hardest when you really dive into its intricacies, but we'll get more into that later. From just an outside perspective, looking at the enemies to allied units, like ratio almost, it works. For now, flavor is a success, which will hurry us on to objective. Oh man, the fact that I'm finally allowed to talk about a defend map, it brings a solemn tear to my eye. To those uninitiated, or actually, now that I think about it, I'm not even sure that I've stated this before on the channel. Again, if you have not heard this before, due to my own, like, idiocy or lack of information, I absolutely love defend maps. I think defend is by far the most interesting objective to play in Fire Emblem. I think the idea is inherently cool, since you're effectively swapping the traditional positions of the two armies and are forced to play an otherwise normal chapter from an alternate perspective. Moreover, I think some of the best chapters in the series happen to be defend maps, which isn't a coincidence, since defend forces you to play different from your normal tactics in order to succeed. It forces you to think outside of the box. It's just got some cool shit going on. And now that I have successfully gobbled the ever-loving shit out of defense cock, let's get into how the Onslaught handles its objective. The core thrust of the chapter is defending the city by blocking off a number of choke points, almost certainly with your tankier units. But honestly, due to the nature of various thrashing mechanics like authority stars and supports and charm stacking, it is perfectly reasonable for you to use units who aren't even that bulky to begin with to hold these points. In the footage you're seeing, I was using a 9 defense Asvel, who'd probably die in around 3 hits, but due to Leaf support plus Kingmaker plus authority stars, that boy is basically facing like 1 hit at every opportunity, even with the enemy's authority stars. Like, he is an incredibly effective dodge tank. And I was also using my 12 Con Lifis, which isn't important, but I do have to mention that my guy leveled Con 5 times before promotion, which is lottery jackpot levels of luck, and I just thought you guys should know that. Probably the most blessed character I've seen in a very, very long time. I've never had a Lifis this good. I've never used Lifis for combat like this much before. It was absolutely, like, hysterical. Either way, you might be thinking that the chapter is relatively simple to solve, as all you really need to do is set the correct units in the correct spots to stop the enemies from storming the capital. And you'd kind of be correct. I'm not going to pretend. I would love to say that the chapter heavily evolves as you progress through the 10-turn limit, and while there are definite, like, eyebrow raisers in the form of reinforcements for the first 5 turns, and the litany of Dark Sages that appear in the last 2 turns, I'd almost say that the map only gets easier the further you get into it, as there aren't enough counters to your own overpowered tactics, so to say. You'll likely have a good deal of promoted units at this point who are able to withstand a battering from the enemy, if they're even able to get hit in the first place, so they're not really in that much danger outside of some, like, genuinely poor luck, like getting hit by multiple, like, 5 hits, 8 hits, like 2 hits in a row. Which it is 1 RN, so it's possible, but it's still, like, very unlikely. A way to counter this strategy of holding these choke points would be to have the enemy force the map to be a little more open, i.e. perhaps they'd create more openings in the walls as the map progressed. But that is just a what if at the end of the day. They really don't do very much to force you to change your strategy. Like, for example, another defend map in the series, Chapter 10 of Conquest will pull the rug out from under you by draining all of the water from, like, turn 8, 9-ish? I forget, it's like the last 2 turns, the water gets drained out of the moats, and like, the game effectively just puts a gun to your head and tells you to think fast or it's going to pull the trigger. Like, when the water gets drained in Unhappy Reunion, it completely changes the dynamic of the chapter. It's really great stuff. That's a chapter that constantly evolves. Here, though, outside of the aforementioned Dark Sages and Wyvern Lords who decided to wear green paint, the map is mostly static. However, I'm absolutely willing to give the map some leeway when it comes to objective, as this is literally the first defend map in all of Fire Emblem. It's like if I was talking about, I forget what chapter 1 of Shadow Dragon, I think it's called Marth and Barks. It's like if I was talking about Marth and Barks from Shadow Dragon, and how that is the first Siege chapter in the series, so it kind of gets to set the rules in a weird way. Like, it's kind of just immune to some criticisms. Although it's not like the Onslaught is poor when it comes to objective, it's more that it's somewhat basic in comparison to some of the later defend maps in the series, like the aforementioned Unhappy Reunion or Blood Contract from Radiant Dawn 313, and I think that's completely fair. It has a good amount of stuff to do with side objectives, as you need to visit at least 3 of the villages if you want to go to 14 Gaiden, which is a god-awful chapter, but rewarp staves are nice, I suppose. The main objective is pretty fun and engaging, but definitely could be expanded more. That's just kind of what I'm trying to say. It's like a C+ in terms of objective, which is a pass, but there's definitely a lot more you could do to the chapter to make it even more intriguing. Like, there's good stuff here, but it's good stuff that could be great. And, like, I always really see the potential in a chapter, and I want it to just go the extra mile. Like, you can be even better. But, this is a pass, but it's like, yeah, it could be a stronger pass. Now on to replayability. Tricky one for replayability this time around, as while I do think there's a reasonable amount of variance, your overall game plan for the chapter kind of remains unchanged between playthroughs. As I set an objective, the most efficient and, more importantly, like the easiest way to play this chapter is simply to place your strongest units into the designated spots that make it so the enemy cannot advance past a certain point, or what we in the industry call a choke point. There's one big one on the left and there's one big one on the right. Once these are filled, the rest of the variance will only come from how unlucky your units get with hit rates and some such. Now, the actual variance will come from how strong your army is going into this chapter, as I like to think of the Onslaught as the real... It's not really like a stat check, but it's a stat check chapter of Thrashia, acting as a checkpoint in which the game will basically examine your army's overall strength to see if they're capable of standing strong against the army of Armor Knights. Like, I've seen some people ask for advice on this chapter on your Reddits or your Serenus forests, and when they show their battle prep, like, the most common similarity that I've seen between these players is that they've decided not to promote their stronger units, meaning that they're missing out on a good chunk of stats that would otherwise be aiding them. So yeah, the chapter isn't amazingly in-depth when it comes to actually beating it, but I do think there is some merit for it making sure that you're effectively, like, playing the game correctly, or like by Thrashia's rules, in which you probably should be promoting early most of the time in Thrashia, because stats will cap at 20, and you do get, like, some heavy promotion bonuses with a lot of classes. I'm still going to give this category a failure, though. I don't think there's enough interesting possibilities in its variables to make it stand out on repeat playthroughs, which is a very, like, whatchamacallit, like a sterile way of looking at it, but, like, most of the chapter is just place your Orson on the left, place your Finn on the right, and just watch the enemy suicide. It's kind of as simple as that. So we get to difficulty. Really happy to finally, like, have a chapter that will probably get a pass on difficulty for once. It feels like for the past 5 or so episodes, we've either had, like, absolute disasters on difficulty, or chapters that come really close within, like, reaching distance of success, but they can't quite grasp it, they're just short. For the Onslaught, though, as I've mentioned, the chapter isn't totally perfect when it comes to its challenge, but I think that it offers enough interesting difficulty in the form of its first few turns. While your units are probably going to be strong enough to combat the enemy units, that doesn't mean the enemy is going to play fair, because it's Thrashia, so they're going to be utilizing stuff like ballistas and authority stars, and making this chapter legitimately tough. Authority stars are the more minor of the two, but by just having the enemies be a little bit more consistent with their attacks, will make them far more threatening to encounter, especially when there's like 20 of them all trying to get Leaf's head on a pike. I know there's different leaders for each red unit, so I don't believe they're all receiving the same, like, leadership style bonus. I believe one of their leaders, like Baldak or Gomthorpe or Glimclop, like, a lot of the just fucking Thrashian bosses have really generic names. Just call them like Steve and Earl. Steve will have 3 authority stars and Earl will have 4, so they will not receive the same bonus, I believe, but I could be wrong on that. I want to say, like, most of your units are receiving the bonuses from the 4 authority star boss, meaning they'll get an additional 12 hit and avoid. And this boss is also so far out of the way that even the idea of killing him in the first place is basically completely out of the question. Like, he is in the bottom left corner of the map, surrounded by bolting sages, an iron ballista, and just a bunch of, like, generals as well. Like, you're not fucking killing him, don't even fucking bother. Which is great. Like, I genuinely do like it when the boss in a defend map is virtually impossible to kill. I absolutely hate it when defend maps just devolve into how quickly can I kill the boss and skip the chapter. Defend maps are cool, I want to defend a keep from hordes of enemies, just let me do that instead. Don't give me an easy way to skip it. Fuck you, chapter 15 of Hector Hard Mode. God, that's a different story. Anyway, back on track. As for the ballista, I know Thrashia is infamous for its use of ballista, in that a lot of maps utilize them in really tedious and unengaging ways, like chapter 10 and 17b uses them really fucking boringly, in which the optimal way to deal with them is to just tank them to the face and wait for them to run out of ammunition, which sucks. Like, there is no other way to put it. It's fucking boring to just hit end turn and watch Leaf dodge ballista bolts over and over again. Here, though, I think they're actually implemented pretty well, as the ammunition lines up perfectly with the number of turns, meaning that the devour the ballista bolt strat won't work here. Instead, you actually need to figure out a way to deal with them if you want your units to feel more safe, and to be able to maneuver your flyers freely, as newly acquired Dean and Ada are basically just sitting ducks without assistance from the rest of your army. Moreover, there's a bunch of ways you can deal with them, like using bolting from a trained Olwyn, or stealing their shit with Tina, or just buckling up and trying to brute force your way through the, like, defensive wall of Armor Knights in order to get to the ballista with your mounted units. Like, there's just a lot of really nice, different tactics to deal with them, and by just making me think of ways to get rid of these menaces, I'm fully immersed with the difficulty of your chapter. While it might not be that tricky later on, the first 3 to 4 turns are interesting enough for me to give difficulty a pass. It's good stuff. And finally, here we are at Enjoyability. I'll just throw my opinion into the arena right away and say that I do genuinely enjoy this map. It's not my favorite defend map, nor is it my favorite chapter in Thrashia, but I think it's a very strong first defend chapter for the series. That keeps my mind engaged when trying to keep up with side objectives and making sure that every single ballistician says hello to Satan before the chapter is over. And honestly, I also think that, like, the majority of players would enjoy this chapter in general, because it's just such a unique experience. When you break Fire Emblem chapters down to their base elements, you're going to be able to describe them in very short statements, so to say. For example, Chapter 8 in Path of Radiance is a simple, defend the fort in the rain. And Ninja Hell in Conquest is, this is absolute agony, but at least it ends at some point. For the Onslaught, its simple statement is, defend the sieged city. Which, shockingly, hasn't really been replicated again through the series, which is, like, absolutely astounding, because it's like one of the most obvious ideas for Defend chapter. You'd think they'd use that idea again. But if you look through the defend maps in the series, it doesn't really happen. Like, you could count maybe Chapter 19 Sakar route on FE6 because it's a very similar structure, but you're playing that chapter as a siege map, so it's completely different. This just gives this aura of individuality to the chapter, as while it might seem kind of simplistic in how you play through it, there really isn't another map in the series quite like it in terms of both aesthetic and overall stress. It's not exactly, like, scientific or anything, but I really like this chapter because it's so stereotypical in its nature in a really fun way. Enjoyability is a definite pass. And that is going to wrap it up for this week's episode, because my voice is about to fucking collapse. There's a lot you can talk about with the Onslaught, so I hope I managed to get, like, even 50% of that across in a meaningful way. It's a pretty tightly made chapter that isn't just dominated by a single unit type, allied or enemy, and definitely gives the player a taste of how the enemy forces are going to feel in the chapters to come. Both aesthetic and position-wise, this chapter acts as the halfway point for Thrashia, telling the player that while the easy part may be over, the rebellion is only really beginning. Holy fuck, that was so corny. I love that. That's staying in. That was really, really, like, overdramatic and, like, movie posterish. Perfect. 10 out of 10. Anyway. As for our anagram, I won't spoil which game or chapter it's going to be, obviously, because that would defeat the purpose, but I'll give you a hint that in order to get to this chapter in the first place, I'll be placing myself in objective horror and just pain. That's really there's no other way to put it. I'm going to go through a lot of pain in order to get to this chapter. Can't wait to get there. It's going to be a treat. Gonna be a treat. Either way, stay tuned, hopefully for next week. There might be a little bit of a break. I am under the weather. I think I have a cold or something. Or an autoimmune condition eating away at my lifespan. But regardless, either way, stay tuned for next week with the titillating anagram from the retirement home, in which olds stay. For those in the back, if you missed it, olds stay. Okay, that's it for me this week. I'm gonna go and pop a couple cough sweets and have a little bit of a lie down, because I need some rest. Anyway, I hope you all are having a wonderful time. I believe when this episode comes out, Christmas will be over, so I hope you had an excellent Christmas, or if you don't celebrate Christmas, I hope you had an excellent Hanukkah, or, like, Kwanzaa, whatever, like, winter holidays you celebrate. If you don't celebrate any of those, well, I hope you're having a fun existence. I don't know, I'm gonna go lie down. Have a great time, everybody. I'm gonna go and explode. Farewell.